Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 102 with Bill Corbett.
So we started doing a lot more family style, if they want the course menu, we'll do what they want. But we try to steer them towards like a family style menu because we can drop all these courses on the table at once. They have to pass each other food. They connect, they talk to each other more. So if it's a customer and an executive trying to like come to a deal, when you're sharing something, you're actually handing people food and looking them in the eye, like it changes the dynamic of the conversation. And so for me, it's really about thinking about how do we get them to the goal they want to get to, right? That executive or the salesperson hosting that event, what is their goal and how do we facilitate that goal? And that's hospitality to me, right? It's like, it's not about me showing you all the tricks I can put on a plate at once. It's really about like making this like convivial environment where they can connect. And that's what we really try to do. And that's sort of like our mission statement is we use food and beverage as a tool for connection. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing our job and we have to look at what we're doing.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On the show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the food and beverage industry who took a different route. They're caterers, research chefs, personal chefs, cookbook authors, food truckers, farmers, cottage bakers, and all sorts of culinary renegades. I myself fall into the personal chef category, as I started my own personal chef business, Perfect Little Bites, 11 years ago. And while I started working in kitchens in the early 90s, I've literally never worked in a restaurant. This week, my guest is Bill Corbett. Many people know him from his years working as a pastry chef with people like Sam Mason, Wiley Dufresne, Lincoln Carson, Michael Mina, and Daniel Patterson. But he left the world of pastry behind and is currently the executive chef and head of culinary at Salesforce. Bill's been recognized as the Best Pastry Chef 2011 from San Francisco Magazine, and in 2013, he was selected as one of the top 10 pastry chefs in America by Dessert Professional magazine. We talk about the transition from being a restaurant pastry chef to overseeing Salesforce's Ohana floor kitchens and barista programs across the company's global towers. There are a lot of changes that come with a transition like this, and Bill discusses learning how to be a better leader and stepping away from the food. We also talk about punk rock and Brooks Headley, and hear about how the Killed by Desserts events came to be. If you've never heard of them, they were a series of collaborative dessert events he did with Christina Tosi, Lincoln Carson, Francisco Migoya, Michael Laiskonis, and Brooks Headley. Man, I wish I could have gone to one of those. I hope they do them again. And if you're a fan of pastry chefs or want to hear about transitioning into the corporate food world, this episode's for you. And now a word from our sponsor, Savory Jobs. Are you shocked at what it costs to post a job ad? Instead, imagine a job site for restaurants only, where you could post as many jobs as you wanted, and it only cost $50. Not for each job you post, but for all the jobs you post, for an entire year. Well, my sponsor, Savory Jobs, has made that a reality. They've launched a revolutionary, easy-to-use job site just for restaurants. And it only costs $50 for unlimited job posts for an entire year. Plus, for our loyal listeners, use the code SAVORY10 and get 10% off. That's SAVORY10. So go to savoryjobs.com and discover the job site that's shaking up the restaurant industry. Forget the big corporate sites like Indeed and Monster. Join the revolution at savoryjobs.com and remember to use code SAVORY10 for 10% off. And now, on with the show. Thanks so much and have a great week. Hey, Bill, welcome to the show. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Man, I don't know, we've never met, but I feel like you and I probably connected on Twitter like a decade ago or so. I talk about very fondly like old Twitter, like when you got on in 2010 or 11, like who were the chefs on there at the time. And I feel like I've stayed in touch on and off with so many of those people.
I remember joining around 2009. I joined, I think, because of Chris Cosentino. We had done like Pebble Beach Food and Wine together, and I ended up helping with a bunch of stuff for his event. And I was doing my own events, and then he ran into some technical difficulties, and I ended up helping him out. So me and him really connected there. That's when we first met and became friends. And then And he was very active on Twitter. And so I was like, oh, I'll check it out. And I jumped on, I think in 2009. Twitter was a different animal back then. I think it was very collaborative. And I think it was a lot of chefs sharing ideas, and it was pretty amazing. And then somehow, it's not that that's not there anymore, but I can remember like Ideas in Food would constantly be just throwing out ideas and interacting, and people like you, like that's how I, heard about you, was because of Twitter. We follow each other, and we've definitely interacted in the past many times, I think, over the years, but never met or talked in person in any way.
I loved those days where, I'd be sitting at the breakfast table and I'd post something, and Alex from Ideas and Food was one of those guys who would almost always chime in and say like, oh, that's great, but like, what if you did this? And then, someone else would just add to the conversation, say, oh yeah, I like that, but how about that? And you could have this kind of almost like crowdsourcing a dish over Twitter, in the course of an hour or two with like 20 people. And I just thought that was so cool.
And then 2 days later, somebody would post a photo of like, hey, here's what we did with it. It's like, I remember Francisco Migoya would respond with like, oh, I saw that idea and I went and made it happen, and here it is. And you're just like, oh, cool. And then honestly, Twitter is the reason we did, I don't know if you ever heard of it. We did an event called Killed by Dessert about around 2012, 2013. There were 6 pastry chefs got involved together. It was me, Lincoln Carson, Francisco Migoya, Christina Tosi, Brooks Headley, and Michael Laiskonis. And so we wanted to do this event, and it started honestly from a Twitter post that Lincoln did, where he kind of just listed his top 3 favorite things or top 5 favorite foods. And one of them was like ice cream right out of the machine, which is like this experience you can't give your guest, right? It's like, because it's just not stable. Like unless you run it to them or you bring them back in the kitchen, they're not ever going to experience that. But the best ice cream you'll ever have is like when you're spinning it out of that Carpigiani and you take like a spoonful off it, and that's like perfect texture, perfect temperature. And Lincoln talked about that, right? And so then we started talking about like, what if we did an event around these sorts of ideas of things we can't normally give the guest, or our favorite things. And so we ended up, the 6 of us somehow ended up on a call and developed this event called Killed by Dessert. We ended up doing about 4 events, I believe. We started in Brooklyn. We did it in the Momofuku Milk Bar like bakery because it was huge, and we could set up tables and cook right next to the guests. And then we took that to, we did it in Austin at Foreign and Domestic. They hosted us, and we did it in Washington, D.C., a kind of scaled down version on a rooftop for a charity event. And then we did a really big one in San Francisco at SF Cooking School, where we did a 2-day event where the first day was a big bake sale where we were able to incorporate about 15 pastry chefs locally. And the next day was the dinner. And we would sort of do this reverse dinner where we'd serve savory hors d'oeuvres from each chef. And then you'd sit down and get 2 courses from each pastry chef. So it was like, you get a little bit of savory, but then you literally ate like 12 courses of dessert, and it's terrible for you. But really like a really fun event. And we would invite people to come help plate from the crowd, and they could come up and help us assemble the dishes. And it was just a super energetic, fun event that we developed. And everybody just got really busy. Christina obviously has a lot going on, and Brooks opened Superiority Burger, and Michael left Le Bernardin, and Francisco's now with Modernist Cuisine, and Lincoln's opened one restaurant, is in the process of opening like several more. So yeah, we often, it comes up every 6 months or so. Somebody's like, when are we going to do another one? And we just haven't kind of come around to do it, but I think it'll happen one day, I think. But that was a result of Twitter, right? Back in the day, it was this great collaboration tool.
Like that inspired Chefs Without Restaurants so much. Like you talk about Foreign and Domestic, like Indie Chefs Week, I thought was so cool, even though I'd never been to one of those events, but watching what Ned and them were all doing, these kind of under the radar chefs getting together, doing collaborative things, working together. That was kind of a model for a lot of what I wanted to do. And I'm not at that level yet where I'm doing that, but ideally I'm going to be traveling around doing kind of pop-up collaborative dinners as part of this. But yeah, that's awesome. I miss those days. I had a problem with smoking some white chocolate one time, and Francisco was like really great about, going via DM on Twitter, talking through the process. Like, what did you do? How did you do it? Here's what I would do. Someone who's probably got a million things on his plate who could take some time to just talk to me about how to best smoke white chocolate,
Yeah, totally. I think that was really incredible about that time period. And even still, those people are still like that. If you were to pose a question to them online, they would probably at least still answer it in short form. Michael Laiskonis is the same way. Like, I can't count the amount of times, I'm trying to figure something out and I reach out to him, and he's got a very technical answer for me, but it all makes sense and it works.
So we jumped kind of right into it, but I'd love to backtrack a little bit. How did you get into the food and beverage industry? Were you always someone who was interested in that? Did you know early on that you wanted to be a pastry chef?
No, the funny thing is, my food knowledge growing up is incredibly lacking. Like I was always, once I got into food, I was always jealous of the chefs who were like, my grandma cooked me this, and this is how I got into food, and it's just part of my being, and blah blah blah. It's like, those stories of like, growing up running around the kitchen as a 5-year-old. Those are not my stories. My story was, my parents do not cook. They don't really get into cooking. It's not something they cherish. Food is just, it's life sustaining, and that's about it. You know what I mean? Like, my dad always makes fun of me for using fancy ingredients and drinking fancy coffee. Like, even when he flies here to visit, like, I will make him coffee every day, but he will bring his Folgers freeze dried instant coffee. And then he'll make fun of me for grinding beans and taking 5 minutes to actually make a coffee. But so my family isn't centered around food at all. I kind of didn't know what I wanted to do with my life for a long time. I was like stabbing in the dark a lot. In my late teens, I had no clue. And then somewhere around I worked in a video store. The video store actually closed, and the owners were like, "Oh, you can come work with us. We're going to open another one down the street." That never really materialized. I went on sort of unemployment and was collecting my check, and I had like 6 or 7 months of that, and I was waiting for them to open that store, and then didn't seem like it was going to happen. So a friend of mine was literally a dishwasher at this restaurant called Mongolian Grill. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet. You kind of fill a bowl with raw ingredients. You bring it up to this massive, like 7-foot wide, round flat top, and you throw the food down there, cook it with sticks, and slide it back into a bowl and hand it to the guest. So I got my start in a kitchen like that. Like, I had worked at McDonald's as a teenager as well, which provided me with skills I didn't realize I even had at the time. Just like being organized, staying efficient, cleaning. But so I kind of excelled in this restaurant, and started as a dishwasher and quickly moved into the kitchen, just doing prep items, making like slicing all the meats that are going on the buffet, slicing the vegetables, and trying to get really fast with a knife and imitate like Martin Yan chopping really fast. And obviously I did it terribly with like rental knives that the restaurant supplied. But in the end, that restaurant had a kind of a bunch of us ended up working there that knew each other, and it became this like camaraderie in the kitchen. And we were like blasting punk music in the back, and really kind of enjoying our time in the kitchen together. And I realized I really like food. I really like there's a magic in it for me that like when you transform raw ingredients into something else. And I started to learn that there. And obviously I realized I wasn't going to really learn what I needed to learn to actually cook well there. So, I got really, basically it ignited something in me for cooking. So I ended up moving to Florida not long after that, just to follow like friends who were in punk, and because there's a really great punk scene in Tampa, Florida in the mid to late 90s. So around 99, I moved to Florida for a couple of years, worked in a random place called Seventh Heaven Psychic Cafe, which literally gave psychic readings, and then you could order lunch. And I worked in that while I lived in Florida. At the time, honestly, I thought I was going to go into graphic design because I was really into punk, and I'm still really into punk. So I moved there to live with, these punk friends, and it was very community minded. One of the friends owned a record shop, and they were using that as a venue as well. And then, our friends were designing the records and pressing the records and doing fanzines, and it was a very, printing the t-shirts. So we had a pipeline for all of it. Right. And we were like, when bands would go on tour, they'd come and we'd help print shirts, and we'd all just go in and help, each other out and help each other get ready for tour and things like that. I was never in the bands at that time, but so I got into that scene, really, I worked in Tampa, and then I was like, I really want to work in kitchens. It clicked, and I ended up meeting my wife there and moving back to Canada for a little bit. I'm originally from Canada, from southwestern Ontario, just to kind of move back with my parents for a few months, save some money because my wife and I were going to get married, and then I was going to move to New York. And then, at that time, I just really got into, like, it sounds cheesy, but watching Food Network, because at that time, the Food Network was actually teaching people how to cook, right? It was like very basic, but it was like going through the basics really well. And so, I would watch all these shows obsessively and learn about cooking roux and stocks and, mirepoix and all that sort of stuff. And then reading every book I could get my hands on, I would just like absorb it. And So I ended up moving to New York after going back to Canada. This is a bit of a long story, but my wife was going to school at the time in New York for School of Visual Arts. And then I was like, I'm just going to work in a restaurant. I'm going to try to get a job. I literally naively, I hadn't gone to culinary school and I hadn't spent time in a New York kitchen. I dropped off 75 or 100 resumes. And even I remember 71 Clinton Fresh Food, Wiley Dufresne's earlier restaurant. And I look back and I'm like, man, no one was going to hire me. What was I even thinking, But I ended up working in this bar, in the kitchen, in the bar. And then this woman came in and saw me, in my chef or my, cook's whites or whatever. And so, she started talking to me and realized I started talking to her saying I was trying to find something. She was like, why don't you come do a stage? And I had barely known what a stage was. I had actually just set up my first one at Le Cirque, which is insane as well, because I was way out of my depth at that point to try and even go in there. Anyway, so this one was like, oh yeah, I work for this great pastry chef. His name is Lincoln Carson. He's awesome. We're looking for someone, we need someone on the ice cream station. Well, and then, Lincoln was working for Be Our Guest at that time, which is a huge restaurant group in New York that owns, I don't know how many now, but at the time they owned 12 restaurants. And Lincoln was heading up a team and a commissary that was doing all the pastry for 7 of those restaurants. So Lincoln took me under his wing and I came in and I staged and Lincoln, I saw something in me and offered me a job, and I really excelled under Lincoln, and Lincoln kind of, honestly changed my life and has been still a mentor to this day. But I started working with him and he introduced me Sam Mason and Johnny Azzini and all them. And, I went and staged with Johnny and Sam. And then at one point I called Sam up to ask him a technical question about something I was trying to do. And he asked me, what am I up to? Because he's actually looking for a cook. And so I ended up going and working for Sam at WD-50. And then Lincoln reached back out and said, hey, we need someone to head up the pastry kitchen at Michael Mina in San Francisco. Do you want to come out? And my wife and I had always wanted to move to San Francisco. So we jumped on that, came out, was there about 2.5 years, went over to Qua for a while, helped Daniel Patterson with a few of his restaurants. And then I went and worked for a group here called the Absinthe Group. And then I left and was trying to open my own restaurant and now have landed at Salesforce about 4.5 years ago.
Well, it sounds like you had the opportunity to work with some amazing people. I mean, just throwing the names out there. I mean, I think those are pretty much, if not household names, definitely really well-known names in the culinary field. I mean, I can't imagine working with a better group of pastry chefs.
I was really, really fortunate. Those, working with Lincoln and then Sam and then, just at WD-50 alone at that time, just connected you to so many people and gave you so much skill and sort of open-minded thinking about about food and how you can cook and about learning the hows and whys of cooking. And, so I never ended up going to culinary school, and I ended up just being very fortunate and maybe not falling into something, but definitely, finding the right path for me.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot on the show, go to culinary school or don't. I mean, it depends on what your opportunities are and your drive, but I mean, you probably got a much better education going your path than so many people who would just go to a traditional culinary school for baking and pastry. I would definitely trade culinary school for having those opportunities.
I think I got lucky, to be honest. You know what I mean? I think there's value in culinary school as well. I think it depends on the person. Are you going to go out there and make those connections? I was also older. I was 29 when I finally figured out what I had figured out a few years before what I wanted to do, but it took me a few years to get my foot in at any restaurant that would take me, or in a kitchen. It wasn't even a restaurant. It was a commissary kitchen, but we were doing things at a restaurant level. So it was and because you weren't doing service, you were just cooking 8 to 10 hours a day and really learning the ins and outs of ice cream and pastry and, custards and whatever, all the techniques involved with pastry, tempering chocolate and doing chocolate work and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think some people getting those skills will get you that foot in the door, and I think that's important too. I just think people need to be wary of, are you going to go spend the $100,000 and then get a job where you're making $15 an hour and trying to pay that back? I think I like the way actually SF Cooking here approaches it. SF Cooking School in San Francisco. It's 4 months in class, 2 months on an externship. And I think it comes in around $25K or something. And
that's a lot less than most schools.
And what they've done is really they've really brought in like the local chefs to connect with. They bring in like Brandon Jew and Daniel Patterson and myself, and there's so many great chefs that go in there and do amazing work with them, and they connect them into the industry, which is great. And they talk to the industry about what do you need in a cook, right? And that's what we want to build, how we want to build our cooks. Where I never had that dialogue with anyone else. Like, it wasn't like, what do chefs need today? It was like, we're going to try to get as much out of them as we can money wise. And then, we'll give them the curriculum we think they need. And then you can take them and do what, try to reshape them. But this is trying to shape people for the industry, which is great.
We need more of that for sure. And more mentors in the kitchens. It sounds like you've had some really great people to work for. I don't always think that's everyone's experience. So
totally,
I think you're fortunate there. So
I had some not so great ones too, but yeah, I had some definitely experiences that are, you use as the warning signs for other cooks coming up. But
well, now you're the executive chef at Salesforce. So that's not a restaurant, and it sounds like you're not doing pastry. So what was that transition like?
Yeah. So when I was out trying to I was trying to open a restaurant, basically. I left, I've wanted to open my own restaurant for years, say a savory restaurant with a heavy pastry element to it. I actually wanted to open sort of like a vegetarian version of a soda fountain, with like comfort foods, but all veg, house-made veggie burgers, and like a little more elevated still, great cocktails, and then being able to infuse like the soda fountain into the cocktail program. And then having an ice cream shop that was like on the side that you could like come up and order out of the window kind of thing. So I was working on that business plan, and I'd gotten one investor, and I thought, okay, it's time to like go. I have like a little bit of money in my pocket right now, and I just need to I was going to do it in Los Angeles because my wife was originally from there. So we went down to Los Angeles, and honestly, like not because of Los Angeles, but because of like some landlord problems and things like that, we had a terrible time. The only bright spot was our first son was born in Los Angeles in 2016, but the rest of the year was just terrible. And then I had built a relationship through doing some private events and other things, and with actually the CEO from Salesforce, Mark Benioff. And so in the fall of that year, I was actually negotiating purchasing a restaurant back in Oakland to come back to the Bay Area. And he emailed me and was like, hey, we're doing this thing. And he kind of explained it in a weird way. It was like, honestly, I call the email that he sent me the haiku, because it was just very much like, hey, we're going to do this kitchen at the top of one of our towers, and it's going to be for the employees to come and recharge, and they can have a little bite and some coffee. And, it's going to be an interesting little kitchen. It's going to be open, and, and we're looking for an executive chef. Would you be interested in interviewing for it? And I said, yeah, definitely. Can you give me a job description? And he was like, well, I think I just wrote it. So I was like, okay. So I flew up from LA and checked out and got a tour from I report into the real estate department, because real estate and workplace services. So that's the department I now report into. But some of the folks in that department gave me a tour. And at the time, so this was going to be at the top of what's a building we have called Salesforce East, which is at the corner of Fremont and Mission and Soma in San Francisco, really close to like the core of this downtown. And then kitty corner for that, they were building not us, but there was a building being built and they were calling it Salesforce Tower. Salesforce was going to, bought the naming rights. It was taking like about around 60 some odd % of the building. And, the building was not even finished yet. So they put me in a construction elevator and took me up to the 53rd floor. And we got off this construction elevator and to this floor with no windows. And we looked out at this view of the Bay Area, like 360-degree view of the Bay Area. And they started going, well, this is where we would have the kitchen. This is where we do this. And then they're like, but it's not going to be on this floor. It's going to be on the very top floor, the 61st floor. So this is what we're looking to do. And then, they show me the plans for the other one in Salesforce East, which was also under construction. The building was done, but they were finishing this floor. So I thought, I've got a kid who's now like at that point 6 months old. And when I was doing this tour with them, and I was like, I want to be able to enjoy life with him. And if I open a restaurant, I'm going to be buried. And so, I thought maybe I'll take this. So I ended up like literally like squashing the deal at the last minute to buy the restaurant and taking this job. And what it was is this space called an Ohana floor that Mark had sort of dreamed up. The idea is we take our top floors and we give our top floors to the employees as opposed to the executives. A lot of companies will give that top floor to executive offices. But Mark made them these sort of open spaces that are very comfortable, amazing views. We put a kitchen in them. The kitchen, these small, beautiful sort of, we call them exhibition kitchens. They're open kitchens, but they're really well designed and beautiful. And then the spaces are beautiful. There's tons of plant life, anywhere from 10 to 40,000 plants, depending on which Ohana floor we're talking about. Literally like live planted columns, everywhere. And so the idea is these are places that employees can go and sort of just recharge, take a break, enjoy the view. And then we also use them obviously for events, they're like kind of showstopper spaces. So we also, we host community events for, a lot of nonprofits can use our spaces for free on nights and weekends. And then we do, obviously customer dinners and executive dinners and community-based dinners and lunches. And then our team does during the day, we do like a mix of employee engagement and then executive and customer support. On the employee engagement side, we'll do things like cookbook events where we'll bring in like Sean Brock or Renee Redzepi or Otto Lengi and do my team will cook out of their book and serve a bunch of snacks. And then, anywhere from 70 to 200 people will come sit down and watch a fireside chat between me and those chefs. So those are like our employee engagement. We'll do surprise pop-ups where we'll announce them internally on our sort of internal social channels and be like, oh, we're doing this like pupusa pop-up right now. And everyone will literally run up there and try to get them before they're gone. And then we just put up snacks on the counter, little hors d'oeuvres size snacks where employees and guests can come by and try a snack. We don't feed the employees like lunch. We don't run like a cafeteria. And the great thing is like, because we're so small, each of our kitchens maybe has, including baristas, like around a team of 11 or 12. And it's like a chef de cuisine, 2 sous chefs, one being a pastry sous chef, and then 2 line cooks, a dishwasher, and then 3 to 5 baristas, depending on the location. And so they can come up and get a really good coffee. We source great coffee and we get to and we really emphasize hospitality. So, we talk to the guests come up to the counter, try a snack. They can sit at the counter, there's stools there. And then for the dinners and lunches, we have like a 24 seat dining table that people can come sit at. And during the day, employees just tend to camp out there and work and hang out and enjoy the view and try to snag the snacks as they come up. But we get to operate like in a way on that restaurant level, right? The farmers market in San Francisco is a 5-minute walk away. We can still go down there, get product. Some farmers will drop off directly to us. They'll pull the van up on their way to the market and we'll run down and just pull off the truck. So we still get amazing product. We're small, we're nimble. We just get to it's incredibly fun. And I feel incredibly fortunate to do what I do now.
Sounds like a really cool place to work. I'd like to work at a place like that. I worked at IKEA and they weren't quite at that level, but they definitely had amenities and things like that I've never experienced in any other business before. And yeah, I think those are great companies to work for.
And they let me build the program from the ground up and kind of trusted me, which was amazing. And I've never felt that level of trust before where we kind of built it. And we've definitely set up we're very serious about examining our form of hospitality because it's not like a restaurant, right? Like it's, we have right now 4 kitchens around the world and we have another 5 on the way. So we've got 2 kitchens in San Francisco, 1 in New York and 1 in London that are all not currently operational because of the pandemic, but they were all operational and will be again soon. But then next year we open Tokyo, Atlanta, Dublin, and then after that is Chicago, and after that is Sydney.
So do you have your hands in that? Do you go and travel?
Yeah, those are all. Yeah, I oversee the whole program. So we have an amazing kitchen designer who designs like all of our spaces, so they're all consistent. We work with an amazing architecture firm that helps design the spaces. So that we all work very symbiotically, and it's amazing. Like the spaces we're building. For the chefs, it's about dropping your ego at the door. And that's sort of like how when I interview people, when I talk to them, I'm like, this isn't about you anymore. It's not about like you're not going to get press here because not many people want to write about the corporate chef program because they can't go enjoy it. Right? If you can't go enjoy it, who wants to write about it?
That's why we have Chefs Without Restaurants.
Yeah, exactly. So there's just this sort of mantra of like drop your ego at the door. It's about facilitating what's going on at the table, right? And so when we first opened, I was thinking we're in this fancy tower, we're fancy kitchen, and we're going to do like coursed out menus. And so we started doing it with coursed out menus, 4 to 5 courses. And then we realized we were kind of making people stay longer than they wanted to, right? They'd all been there since 8 a.m. already working somewhere else in the building. And they had to come up and do some business dinner. And then we realized also we were interrupting them every 15 to 20 minutes with a new course and stopping the conversation. So we started doing a lot more family style, if they want the course menu, we'll do what they want. But we try to steer them towards like a family style menu because we can drop all these courses on the table at once. And then they have to pass each other food. They connect, they talk to each other more. So if it's a customer and an executive trying to like come to a deal, when you're sharing something, you're actually handing people food and looking them in the eye, like it changes the dynamic of the conversation. And so for me, it's really about thinking about how do we get them to the goal they want to get to, right? That executive or the salesperson hosting that event, what is their goal and how do we facilitate that goal? And that's hospitality to me, right? It's like, it's not about me showing you all the tricks I can put on a plate at once. It's really about like making this like convivial environment where they can connect. And that's what we really try to do. And that's sort of like our mission statement is we use food and beverage as a tool for connection. And if we're not doing that, then we're not doing our job and we have to look at what we're doing. And that's sort of where we start over again. If it's like, are we connecting people with this? If not, start again.
A lot of chefs who come from restaurants have trouble transitioning into a non-restaurant environment. What were some of your biggest challenges when you got there? Did you have any?
We've had a lot. And honestly, we still have them as a team. Most of my team comes from restaurants. I would say 95%. Or if they're baristas, they came from the local roaster sort of barista bar. I think the challenge was, we stepped into this corporate world and it was very structured. And I think anybody else coming from another company would kind of understand the structure more quickly and understand what resources were available. And I think that was a big thing. Like as a chef, it took me a while to learn that I can ask for more things than I'm used to, and I can say, listen, this would make our team more viable. I hired a project planner because I couldn't keep up with all the projects we're working on. So I hired a project manager that handles the kitchens now. And she, funnels the questions to me every week in a weekly meeting now. So it's like, okay. But whereas before it was like, I was getting all these emails all week long and I couldn't step away from the kitchen long enough to like sit down and read them. And then I realized like, I shouldn't be in the kitchen anymore. We're building all this. And if I'm supposed to be running it, like I can't chop the onions and make the decisions on what the cooking suite's going to look like, or
Is that hard stepping out of the kitchen? Because that's something I think so many of us deal with, even in restaurants, when you become an executive chef and you start cooking or stop cooking and doing more admin stuff. Was that tough for you?
It was super hard at first. So my boss at the time, she's the head of real estate. I basically, we had a one-on-one meeting and I brought this sort of thought to her. And, I was like, have you ever heard of a chef de cuisine? And I was like, and she, of course, hadn't. And so I kind of explained to her, our company's done a lot of work with Michael Mina. So I just explained to the Michael Mina organization how like a chef de cuisine operates and what they do and how they're there to represent the brand and the chef. And I was like, I think we need to hire a chef de cuisine in each one of these kitchens because like I'm getting buried trying to cook and kind of make all the decisions and grow the department. And so she was like, all right, hire one, So we did that. And then I hired Yoni Levy, who's he was the chef at Outer Lands before coming to us. And then he'd also helped open up Alta with Daniel Patterson. And he's just an incredibly hard worker and really a great person and really cares about what he does. So it was amazing to pull him in, but like he would, be running the kitchen and I would step on the line and then go, what are you doing here? And I'd start like questioning a cook and being like, you sure you want to do that? Is that the right move? And I'd start like picking apart what they're doing when Yoni had already talked to them, and then, so it was really like, it was co-managing almost and double managing these people. And they were like, who am I supposed to listen to? And then Yoni pulled me aside and was like, dude, you gotta not do that, And I was like, okay, fair enough. So a lot of it was learning to be a better leader, learning to let him lead and let the other chef de cuisines in the other locations lead. So now we sort of like, we building and standardizing the program is what I'm about. And it was hard to step away from the food. I still very much walk by and check it out every time, when we are in the kitchen, and I check it out every day and see what they're putting up. And, and if there's an issue, I talk to Yoni now and Yoni gets to talk to them, so it took me a little while to be a better manager in that way. And it's taken me a while to be a better manager overall because I learned a lot of bad habits. I wasn't a screaming chef at this point, not that I never did that in the past because I did, and it was terrible. But at this point in my career, I'd given up on that. But like, you still, no one teaches you to be a manager in the restaurant world. It's just like, is the food going out on time? And if the food's going out on time, then you're managing, to an extent. That's the way it's looked at a lot. And no one teaches like real leadership. And the amazing thing about coming into a corporate company like this, and a company that truly cares, is leadership training is huge. It's honestly the stuff I do as a manager now takes up so much of my time, but it teaches me so much about how I should be managing these people and how I should be helping them grow and how I should be getting the best out of them and trying to understand, okay, this person works this way. And so I have to manage them a little differently and to draw more out of them. But yeah, so in the end, it was tough to walk away from the food part of it. But in the end, I think I'm really stoked to be where I'm at. I'm very excited to be building this really, what I think is a really special program that I don't think exists anywhere else. Like, I don't think like not every other company, but a lot of companies, they do the cafeteria thing, which is fine because employees love it. But I'm lucky that I get to like kind of work at this like very intimate level because the teams are small, the kitchens are small, and we get to do just amazing work because of it. And I get to help like build this ship. And I've never been able to build a culture before. Especially as a pastry chef, you always have to fall in line with whatever the culture the chef is setting, right? So like as a pastry chef, I was always frustrated with something one way or another, or like bringing problems to management. And they're like, yeah, you're right, that should change, but it never would change, right? And it was just like, so it was very frustrating on that. But now it's like, I get to be that change. And when people come to me, I get to say, look at our program honestly and say, okay, are we doing the right thing here or should we change it? And we have a very open dialogue about like moving forward as a team. And it's amazing.
I'm excited to see that as becoming also more of a trend in kitchens in general. I mean, totally. I've often said, I wanted to start my own business for a long time, but the straw that broke the camel's back is the last job I was at. I felt like I was not on the same page as my general manager. There was a really bad culture where I was working, and I was the executive chef, but I still wasn't allowed to run the kitchen the way I felt it needed to be run. And I was just like, I can't come in every day kind of executing the orders that I didn't agree with and then, allowing this toxic culture. And for me, I had to leave, and it's sad. I had been at that job for 10 years. And this is something I see over and over in kitchens, is just the refusal to fix these problems or just flat out, ignoring them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is changing luckily now. I think, when I was coming up, that was not the way it is. And we all perpetuated it, we all took part in it. And then, I think we're all learning now at this point that was not the right way. And there's just like all these excuses made for why restaurants should be run in those ways. And, oh, you can't turn a profit, you can't do this. Well, then it's not a viable business in the end. If you can't turn a profit without abusing people, then it's not viable. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
We always talk about how crazy it is that this wouldn't fly in any other place, right? Like if you're an accountant, your boss would never come through and like throw a book at you, an accounting book at you and scream at you in the middle of the office. Like, why does that work in kitchens? I don't know.
Right. And you wouldn't be working like, like there's one restaurant I worked at where it was like, we'd show up at 8 or 8:30 in the morning and we'd work till midnight because they didn't want to hire 2 crews. And we'd do that Monday through Friday. And then we'd have only dinner service on Saturday. And we'd still come in at, noon or 1 and work a 10 to 12 hour day. And then they'd call that a half day. And then you'd have Sunday off and you were just burnt out, and they wondered why they couldn't keep staff and why people didn't care about, what they were doing. And it was just like, but those sorts of things are like, totally taking advantage of people. And then you're told, well, if you can't hack it, then you must not be good enough, and it's like, or you must not care enough, or maybe you're not meant for this industry. And it's like, well, maybe the industry needs to change. And I think it is changing, and I think it's getting better. And maybe there's going to be less of that, like insanely meticulous chef run restaurant. I think there's enough of them around though. They're still there, like there's still amazing restaurants doing that kind of work still.
And I also think it's, I don't want to say like a young man's game, but, you mentioned having a child. For me, it was the same thing. I have kids and I sacrificed a lot early on, not spending time with my wife. I had parents who were both ill and ultimately passed away. And I felt like I didn't spend enough time with them while they were literally like on their deathbed. You don't get that time back. And I felt like I got another chance when I had kids. And that was kind of when I was like, no, I just like, I can't do this. I'm not going to be here 80 hours a week. I'm not going to miss every single thing in my kid's life. For this cooking job. It's just, I'm glad I
Totally.
realized it at an earlier age.
Yeah. I think I got really lucky and had this job sort of, offered to me. And if I didn't have that, I don't know what I'd be with the pandemic right now. I'd probably be in a lot of trouble because I was like ready to open this restaurant. And I think right now I'd be suffering pretty hard, as are a lot of people. And, and there was a guilt factor in that for me. It's like, there's like you feel sort of guilty that like, because it wasn't that long ago that I was in that world with them and in that boat with them. And I was seeing so many people struggle around me. And then we've weathered the pandemic, and I've made it, my team, we're still there, and we're, our company allowed us to, we sort of like pivoted and we became this online content team. And now we've published we did a virtual cookbook. Like it's all for internal for employees, but we published a virtual cookbook. We're calling it. It's basically like a database of right now it's almost at 700 recipes in the last year. And then we've done 60 some odd cooking videos, and we do all these live events for customers and employees in general. And then even customers of the company, that are, some of our customers are culinary related. So we started doing these customer spotlight series from my team where we would bring them in and we would let that customer tell their story. And then we'd do a demo together and then do a Q&A afterwards, and as a way to sort of encourage our employees to go buy their product. So we've really flipped our team, and our team has suddenly become video editors and recipe writers and copywriters and event managers. And it's totally, and everyone's gotten comfortable in front of a camera, which is amazing to see, and does really great work with videos now. And and it's funny to see all the skills they developed. And now we're trying to figure out how do we kind of incorporate that virtual world into our physical world when we go back.
Well, it seems like everyone needs to be a content creator these days, myself included.
Yeah.
Again, I never thought I'd have a podcast, and, you're trying to put out the best photos of your food that you can. And then if you want to start blogging, you have to learn how to write, or at least you should maybe try to get better at writing, and all these things that I never had in my toolbox. I figured out, and you see so many people now just spending so much of their days working on content.
Yeah, it's funny. All my food photos now are stuff I'm making for my kids.
Well, I've been there as well. Well, where do you find culinary inspiration? What keeps you going?
So I have a cookbook problem. I buy a lot of cookbooks still, even though I'm not the one kind of necessarily creating the food all the time. The people that I've hired are 100% capable and do not need my help. And I should honestly not even offer it unless they ask for it, because, I should just let them do their thing. But, and a lot of it, honestly, I try to buy friends' books, and, the Mr. Jew's book came out a few months ago, and it's pretty incredible and beautiful. I buy more books than I can read, it seems like lately, just because of the two young kids. Every time I try to read a book, my eyes start closing because I'm exhausted half the time. But a lot of them centered around work now. We're doing Tokyo in about 8 or 9 months. We got to open Tokyo in February. And I've never been, and I can't go because of the pandemic. I can't go and learn the culture. And so I'm buying a ton of books and trying to read. And I've actually hired a Japanese consultant to help guide me and make sure that, I'm not going to mess this one up, because it's totally different than the other kitchens we've opened in the past, But yeah, so, cookbooks a lot, online a lot too, just reading things that come across my path. I look at people like Francisco Migoya constantly, and Michael Laiskonis, and it's obviously a different path for them at this point. Brooks Headley, Superiority Burger is I don't know, I can eat there every day.
I just made a batch of them at home because the cookbook is amazing. And I've been to the restaurant, and the first time I had one of the burgers, I was like, damn, if this is not better than any beef burger I've ever had. And I'm a meat eater, but that is one tasty burger. So I made a batch just 2 days ago, which makes 10 of them. And I love having those.
Brooks is he's some sort of magician, he's really great at just really delivering flavor and umami. And the last time I was there was actually my birthday when we opened our New York kitchen in 2019. We were about to open, and then, we finished on the Sunday, which was my birthday. And I was like, all right, who's coming with me? And we 8 or 9 of us went down to Superiority Burger. They were super busy. And Brooks was he came out with 2 trays of food, and he was like, follow me. And he set them down on a tree planter down the street. And he's like, this is table 23 or whatever he called it. He had a specific number for it. And he's like, enjoy. We basically all, just around this tree planter all sampled everything. It was
They have the most weird, awkward seats in there. There's like this bench seat with like the little folding over kind of swing arm tables there where you can fit like 4 people up against the wall. Otherwise you got to take it outside.
The thing about Brooks is like, I don't know if you know much about his musical career. Like in the world I come from, the hardcore punk world, Brooks is a legend. And it's kind of, it was kind of funny because Michael Laiskonis introduced me to Brooks, and he just emailed the 2 of us and said, you both like punk, you're both pastry chefs, you should know each other. And then Brooks was like, oh, I'm going to be coming out there. My band's doing a reunion show, in a few months. So we should hang out when I come out. And I was like, oh, what band are you? And he was like, oh, Universal Order of Armageddon. And I will say, like, if you're into punk or like anything kind of like on that level, go check them out. They're incredible. They were on Kill Rock Stars Records, which was a pretty big label back in the day, indie label. But Brooks, he was in a band called Born Against. He was in the Wrangler Brutes. He's been in all these awesome bands. And so Brooks and I just hit it off and kind of both came from that same world. And I will say Superiority Burger is, and I don't know what he'll say when I say this, but like to me, it is a punk rock zine come to life as a restaurant.
What was his dessert book before that? Definitely had that feel too.
Totally. And that's, I think, what he was going for. He was like, it's this cut and paste feel of like, let's put this together. Let's put a lot of fun things in here. Some are inside jokes and weird things. And like, well, Steve Albini wrote the foreword, right, to his book. Like, and Steve Albini is one of the like legendary, recording engineers of, he recorded, on one note, he recorded Nirvana, but he recorded so many incredible underground bands. And he was also in like Shellac and Big Black. And, he's an incredible musician in his own right. So it's like, the fact that guy's writing the foreword to Brooks's book is pretty incredible. Anyway, we can talk about Brooks all day.
Yeah. But
I love Brooks.
I love that he's got so much personality, but that's what I really love, a restaurant and a chef that are more than just that. It's not just the food. I find, it's culinary arts. If you want to be, in my opinion, specific about that, I think there's an art component to that. And I really enjoy drawing, for me, inspiration from places outside of just the food world. Like I'm very inspired by going to an art gallery or, listening to an album.
And I think, that restaurant, that's again, like, as I say, like a restaurant that is a very personal statement. That restaurant is very personal to Brooks, It's a personification of Brooks in restaurant form. And it's pretty amazing to see him pull that off and have something like that be so sustainable and so successful.
Yeah. I feel like if I ever had a restaurant, it would be something like that, just like small, kind of awesome food, not overly complicated. Like that's how I like to eat these days too. I mean, there's a time and place for like that very fancy, formal sit down experience, but I just want something that's gonna, wow me, that doesn't seem like it's overly stuffy.
I just want to sit down with like 10 people and share everything,
Yeah.
It's like the Lazy Susan experience at an amazing Chinese restaurant. And like, there's one here called Spices. They actually have a few locations in the Bay Area, but we used to all go to one. Me and like when I worked at Qua, it was like Evan Rich from Rich Table and Brett Cooper and all these, we all worked together at that point. We would always go there on like birthdays and special occasions and just like order everything and like just have this giant pile on the Lazy Susan and spinning it and eating and eating. It was awesome. Like that's how, I don't know, I just love that whole like sharing, like ordering a bunch of stuff and sharing it together is the way to go for me.
Who would you want to work with or shadow if you could? Is there anyone still who would kind of be on your bucket list of people to work with?
There's a lot of people I'm very fascinated with, I don't know if I want to work with anybody anymore. I don't know, honestly, if I can hack it in a restaurant anymore. You know what I mean? Like,
or at least just like hang out and be a fly on the wall just to see how they work.
I love the way Rene Redzepi works. I love like, I know some people are like, oh, it's just like fancy food for rich people or whatever, but like he really thinks outside the box and he really takes things and transforms them. Like I think of things like his celery root al pastor and stuff like that. Like it's incredible watching what he does with vegetables. And I'm vegetarian, so like for me, like I love people who can do innovative things with vegetables. I always keep an eye on Wiley Dufresne. I work for him, but like I still like, he's someone who is always a fascinating person, and is he's like always fun to watch what he's up to. I'm trying to think who else. Michael Solomonov, like we did a cookbook event with him at work, and he's really amazing too. I love his food and his work and his books, and he's I really like what he does. Yeah, and then people like Shola. Shola is incredible. Following what his work, and I listened to his episode here on the podcast, and it was really great. He's incredibly smart and not pretentious. You know what I mean? And like when he totally could be and get away with it if he wanted to be, but he's like he just seems very down to earth. He does amazing work, and it's watching what he does is pretty incredible. And you're always
makes you
jealous
question
of,
everything. The stuff he does.
Yeah.
Some of it seems so. You should have thought of it, right? Like you see what he does. It's like, oh, that's so simple. It's stupid, but it's like nobody else thought of it.
You know who I think does that really well too? And this is in a different way, not in the like kind of sort of like that sort of research and development way, but like I think Rich Table in San Francisco has an incredible way of taking the like a comfort food dish and elevating it and giving it a twist that you're like, I wish I would have thought of that. But it's so tasty and so good. They're pretty incredible there too. That's one of my favorite restaurants in the city is Rich Table. And then
I haven't been out there in like 12 years. It's before kids. It's one of the last vacations I took before we had kids. So I'm overdue for a visit. Hopefully we'll get out there again and bring the kids.
There's a lot of awesome stuff out here, I will say. It's changing and shifting like everywhere else right now. It's so we'll see what happens. But there's a lot of amazing chefs and restaurants out here.
Well, I know you've got a lot going on with all the places you're opening, but do you have any other goals, either personally or professionally?
Personally, I always have these ideas of like wanting to do a cookbook in some way. And it's always been like, but what do I have to say? I've always been like, so I want to do a cookbook at some point. I've started thinking about like, honestly, I might do a veg sandwich or try to put together a veg sandwich cookbook because I feel like veg sandwiches are often terrible in restaurants and in a lot of places. They're like the afterthought. Oh, let's make a garden burger. Let's do, but like the idea of kind of coming and putting together, like taking great vegetables and making great sandwiches and doing a whole like book on it to deep dive into it kind of excites me. I haven't done any of the work on that yet. So it's a thought though. And it's something that constantly nags at me. On a personal level, I want to do a podcast like everybody else, I guess, but like, and center around musicians who are serious cooks, not necessarily restaurant cooks, but who take food seriously, but also musicians that are at least at a level where they like take music seriously. Like people who put out records, people who actually play like real shows and real venues. Like people like Brooks, right? Like someone like, interview someone like Brooks, or like I have friends here that are in this amazing band called Kowloon Walled City. And the bass player, Ian, he's vegan, grows a ton of food, makes his own pizza doughs and breads and just takes it all very seriously. He's not professional anyway. Honestly, I think if he wanted to go professional, he could probably go and develop those skills pretty well. But and then also the singer guitarist in that band, Scott, is sort of like following in those footsteps a little bit, getting really into cooking. We during the pandemic, the three of us started like a text group and they named it Ask El Cuchillo because they kept asking me food questions. And so now it's just us goofing around on text all the time now. But like, interviewing those guys about food and music and how they intertwine and food experiences on tour and things like that. Like that's sort of like, there's so many people from the punk world in the food world. It's for me, it's music, food, my kids. And so like, I want to get in shape. I want to get back on my bike, things like that. Those are the goals for me. And then for my team, I just want to see my team grow. We're opening, we're going to end up with 9 kitchens, in a few years. And who knows, it may branch off into other ways with the company, like the food service, outlets we might create. I don't know. You never know which way it's going to go. Salesforce is a very fast moving company and very innovative in the way they think about things. So, we could be overseeing other food projects down the road. But like for now, it's going to be 9 of these sort of Ohana floor kitchens and really just, for me, becoming more organized, a better manager, like building a really strong, just like a really great team, which we already have a really strong, great team. It's going to grow and we got to kind of get our ducks in a row to make sure that the next 5 kitchens can like perform at the same level. And so that's going to be a big undertaking and I'm pretty excited about it.
So do you think you're done with restaurants for good?
I would say most likely. I would say I'm happier than I've ever been at any job in my life. And if it works out and I'm at Salesforce till I retire, I wouldn't be sad about that. So I could see myself just staying here, I don't really have a bug to go back to restaurants. There's times I miss it. I miss the energy at times, and I miss that sort of like, that push. But I think I'm pretty happy, and I it's allowed me to grow and explore new things that I never would have explored. And we've opened, at the end of this, we'll have opened 9 kitchens and built 9 different teams, and around the world, and that's just not something that's going to happen to me if I go back into restaurants. And I don't know if maybe I'm not the person who should open restaurants anyway. I was trying to do it, and it took me a long time to kind of even get to the point of having a business plan and trying to open something. And I feel like I'm better suited where I'm at now. It's like, it just clicks for me, and I'm super happy.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you have to realize what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and things happen in interesting and mysterious ways, and just go with that. Right.
Yeah.
Being open to
sure.
things. Well, thanks for coming on the show. I'm so glad we had a chance to catch up.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great to finally connect, somewhat in person. At least virtually.
Hopefully we can do it in person at some point. I said, I want to get out that way. And if you ever find yourself out in the DC area, let me know. So to all of our Chefs Without Restaurants listeners, this has been Chris, and you can find us as always at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on all social media platforms. Thanks so much, and have a great week. Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.